I knew I always wanted to work at the intersection of business and technology. I didn't know how it was going to happen in practice. And I remember being a consultant, my first job, and trying to explain to my manager what I wanted to do, which ultimately became what a product manager is.
That is Martie Burris, a senior product manager here at Salesforce working on Work.com. I'm Josh Birk, a developer evangelist for Salesforce, and here on the Salesforce Developer Podcast, you'll hear stories and insights from developers for developers. Today, we sit down and talk with Martie about the development of Work.com, its features, and how developers can customize it. However, first, I wanted to talk about something that's near and dear to Martie's heart.
Folding chair is my baby.
Nice.
So Folding Chair was birthed out of me moving to the Bay Area and meeting a Black student at Stanford at one of those tech meetups. And she's like, "You're the first female Black product manager I've ever met." And I'm like, "Huh?" And she's like, "Will you mentor me?" And I'm like, "Girl, you went to Stanford. You do not need a mentor. Like, you are fine." And she's like, no, seriously. And so I started working with her. And then over the course of that, probably 6 months, she got her first product job. And one of the things she said to me is, she's like, "You really should try to scale this out and help more people. You actually have really good advice." And I'm like, I don't know. And so I just put it out on LinkedIn one day, and I'm like, "If you want free career advice, I'll help." And I got the biggest outpouring. And so I've been doing it now for a few years. And Folding Chair has a mission. And basically our opportunity is to create space for people. It comes from a Shirley Chisholm quote about, if there's not space at the table, then bring a folding chair. And so that's what we've been doing for the last 2 years, bringing folding chairs for Black and brown product managers of color. And I think we've created, what are we at? $4.5 million in salaries.
Nice.
And we've got almost 30 product managers placed in just under 2 years. And I'm the single coach. So I spend a lot of my free time doing this free coaching. But it's been one of the most fulfilling things, if not the most fulfilling thing I've done in my career, for sure.
That is awesome. Okay, so to help frame the relevance of this topic, just kind of a side question, how's working from home?
I really like it. So people are really shocked to know, but I'm a serious introvert. You wouldn't know it. I hide it really well, but I'm a serious introvert. And so the idea that I have in my house, I have an excuse not to leave for the last 6 months.
Right.
Has been amazing. I've been so productive. This has been some of the most productive work time I've had in my career. It's been amazing.
Nice.
I know it's kind of guilty feeling, because I know that hasn't been everyone's reality.
Right.
But as a person who's living alone in silence, who's a true introvert and needs time alone to recharge, I couldn't ask for anything better. Granted, now that the restrictions have released, I do have some friends who come over unannounced, but if that's the worst of it, I can handle it.
No, I totally understand, because it's we can have sympathy for our extroverted humans, but just earlier today on Twitter, I'm a public speaker and I'm also a closet introvert. And it's that weird time where it's do you miss it? And some parts of it I do, being with the community and seeing people, but some parts of it, not so much. One thing I don't really miss is trying to figure out if somebody is trying to handshake, fist bump, or wants a hug. That's
that is a very awkward interaction.
Right.
But it's always you guys are doing the weird hug towards each other, and you're not knowing where they're at.
Right. And it's then you have to back off, and it's a decision tree I don't really need. So I'm good too. Okay, so elevator pitch time. What is the elevator pitch for Work.com?
Work.com is our opportunity to not only help the world the way Salesforce does best, but to help employees, students, and companies return back to work safely when it works best for them.
Cool. Okay. And so to follow up on that a little bit, do you feel like Salesforce is a platform kind of uniquely qualified for delivering Work.com?
Abso-freaking-lutely. I would say something else, but I don't know if I'm allowed to say that on the podcast. But yeah, that was one of the things that I got out of building it, especially coming from the Heroku tech stack over into the Salesforce proper tech stack. Mm-hmm. I did not know how robust it was, and I'm an internal employee, and now having to work on that, this huge point in my career and doing this very, very massive thing that has literally helped the world get back to normal. It's been amazing. And everything from the openness of our platform, the fact that you can pretty much plug anything else into it, the robust nature of the app exchange. We have an app for everything. We are literally enterprise app store, and we have an app for everything. And so that leveraging that, we have an ecosystem of partners. Mark's a celebrity. He's friends with everyone. He could call whoever he needs to help us work through problems. We need the CDC to help us with recommendation. Oh, Mark's got it. You know what I mean? So it's like, it's very, very cool to see how all the different places came together, because it was literally done by almost every cloud of Salesforce was involved in some way or another.
Nice. And actually tell me a little bit about that, because I want to get into details, but Work.com was something that came together very quickly, right?
Very quickly.
Yeah.
I remember I went on PTO. I was off work for a week and a half. I came back and I had an email from my boss who said, Mark wants us to work on this thing. I think you can help. Just schedule some time. And within 6 weeks, we built Work.com from concept to real software. 6 weeks flat. And when I tell you, none of this stuff existed, not even the data model, nothing existed. 6 weeks to full working software. Amazing.
That's
best
crazy.
Team on earth.
Nice. Okay, so let's talk a little bit at like a high level. What are the working parts of Work.com?
At a high level, we're doing a few things. So the biggest thing we deliver from Salesforce platform was the command center. And a command center is this kind of executive level overview of everywhere you do business, right? It's got lots of like these widgets in there. It's got this custom UI you don't see anywhere else in Salesforce that allows you to look at all these things. It even has like a Tableau COVID-19 tracker that lets you see where all the hotspots are forming all across the world. And it's plugged into like some external data sources too. It's really awesome. We also have shift management that allows for space and facilities planning. So think of that as now only a few people can be in a certain room at a time, or even an elevator at a time. Right. And so shift management helps you manage who's in what place. Contact tracing helps you manage who's in what's place if you've had incident, right? And so if you do need to go figure out like who's come in contact with who, that's when you hear the stories of like, you know, it was at a party and then all these people got it. Contact tracing is how they figured it out. And so we have the contact tracing solution in there. Let's see. We also have the ERM response, or the emergency response management solution in there from our friends over in industries. And wellness. Forgot about that. How do I forget about wellness? Wellness is your COVID survey. And so you've probably, if you've even tried to go outside, you've had to take it, and it's basically that. Have you come in contact with someone? All of that kind of information, right? Yeah. And so now providing that information so you can return back to your office or your school building or whatever the case may be, it's done throughout the wellness app.
Gotcha. And tell me a little bit about like how that kind of all flows together. Like, so as an employee, am I kind of self-servicing to take the wellness app, and then does that flow back into contact tracing depending on the results?
Actually, yeah, that's exactly how it works. And so if you're an employee and you decide to come back to work and your company's really smart and purchase Work.com, the first thing you're going to do is on your phone, in your email or text or something, you're going to get something that says, take your wellness survey. And so it actually has curated questions that we worked with CDC and WHO on, and experts within our health cloud organizations as well to come up with these curated list of questions. And so you're going to answer those. Once you answer those, it creates something called your wellness status. And your wellness status is now something that is tracked by your company. The amazing thing is, though, we leverage the consent framework. So you are consenting to giving your data, and you can choose not to consent, and that's totally fine. We've advised tons of companies to be okay with, if your employee doesn't want to give that, it's okay. And here's some steps, and here's the things that you can do to work around it. And so basically that wellness status is like a key for you in the system. So once it says, hey, yes, you're available to come into work, then you're prompted to do your shift management aspect. And your shift management aspect basically says to you, I can now go to work. And because now all of us have a different opinion of what work hours looks like. Maybe you're homeschooling, maybe you're babysitting, maybe you literally just don't want to come into work certain days because you're just more comfortable at home given the pandemic. You can say, hey, these are when I want to come in. And this is not like a time tracking tool. It's more of a space planning tool. It helps your facilities managers, your real estate folks, your office managers plan who's going to be in the office and when. And so those are the two pieces that work together. And so if, for instance, you did get sick and your wellness status changed, then you just would lose your shifts for the week, and they would go to someone else, and your real estate folks would just work on getting someone else in who can come into the office. And if you don't want to come in at all, you don't have to. And so I think that's my favorite part about all of that is we try to give as much agency to the employee as possible to, one, control their data, but also come back to work when it makes sense for them and encourage our customers to do the same. So not only are we encouraging them with the software, but we're encouraging them with the way that we're treating our employees at Salesforce by giving them that choice.
Got it. No, that's a really interesting, and I think it's almost a philosophical question about, balancing that agency versus transparency and privacy and all of these things that once we start talking about health data is just really so important.
It's huge. It's huge. It's something we've never done really in enterprise level software. That's a part of PII a company has never had to collect. They've never needed to know whether or not you were well enough to come to work. And now there's a piece of data that is now tracked about you. And so it was definitely something that we thought very carefully and considerately about. How do we not only keep that data private in the system so some random Joe Smo can't find that your personal health data, but also how do we give employees agency to understand how their data is being used in the system, give them transparency. How do we promote an ethical and compliant workplace and encourage our customers to do that as well? And so we put a lot of what I would say hard rules in place as we sold the software as to how it needs to be used and can't be used as part of implementation. And we did as much as we could to really protect employees in that way. But it's definitely something that is different, right? And it's the future of data, right? Part of the new normal is companies now are collecting that data, and they will be collecting it for the foreseeable future.
Right. And if I'm that employee and I wake up, I've got the fever, I've got the chills, I can't smell anything. Once that's reported, what are some of the specific, like how exactly does contact tracing get involved?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there's a couple of different ways, right? And so depending on how a company is implemented, they may have contact tracers in place where you can just say, call to a hotline or something like that and say, hey, I've had an encounter, or you can say it through your wellness survey, like, hey, I'm sick, one of the two. So but either way, even if you do it through the survey, it still links back to contact tracing. If you do it directly to the contact tracer, it'll work that way too. So once that happens, an encounter is taking place. And what's going to happen is you're going to get a phone call and someone's going to say, where were you? And within the contact tracing solution, we're allowed to see where somebody was, who else was in that space during that time. You'd also give a time frame. I was at McDonald's for 2 hours with 2 coworkers on this date. And then it starts to create what we call contact graphs that help manage the encounter. You can see everyone who's come in contact with that person at work, and depending on what version of contact tracing a company is using, possibly at home too. Because there's actually 2 solutions. There's a private sector and a public sector. But more often than not, they're using the contact tracing for the business sector, right? And so they're looking and saying, okay, so who are all the coworkers you came in contact with? Anyone in the office, the lobby, and they're going through all these different spaces with you. And so basically, once they figured all that out, your work is done. And then it's up to the contact tracer to continue to alert people that they've been exposed, that they need to get tested. And some of our customers even have testing facilities right on site. So people can go downstairs and take a test and then go home for the day. They actually don't even have to make it a huge deal if they don't need to. They can just say, hey, take your test and see you when the results come back.
Nice. So I want to talk a little bit about implementation and technical details, but I'm gonna throw kind of a not, I guess, theoretical, hypothetical, maybe the better word. So I think you're uniquely qualified to answer this in some ways because I'm guessing you've visualized this. Like, we're talking about a lot of very large changes to the day-to-day life of an employee.
Yeah.
And we've kind of touched on those, but can you kind of give me what's the summary of the new normal until there's a vaccine and we kind of get out of this? What's the day in the life of an employee going to look like now?
So it's changed quite a bit. And I think the culture of the company is going to define just how easy this is. But I think the number one thing that you can always look at this as a silver lining that comes from this is we have pushed the boundaries of the future of work.
Gotcha.
Even jobs that can never be seen as virtual, never be seen in a digital age, are done in a digital manner now. Even very simple things, like one of the things I had to get a new driver's license Finally, the California DMV has a website that allows you to do these things.
No.
Finally. It took so long. Like, this was never a thing. Like, you always have to go stand in the office and fill out all the paperwork. And they have now taken these things online. And so the thing is, now as a worker, not only do I have agency to work more remotely and freely, jobs that it also, from a recruiting standpoint, like opens up the opportunities that are available to you. Now that things can be done online, you can work for any company. I was talking to a friend who recruits at Facebook, and she's like, it's opened up our recruiting pool so big. So people who never want us to live in Menlo Park or live in the Bay Area now have an opportunity to work at a company like Facebook. Or, you know, they're smart. They work for the right mark, and they work with us, right? But it opens up these cool opportunities. And so I think it has empowered employees in a way that we couldn't track, right? You have more agency over your career than you've ever had before.
That's really interesting, and it's like it kind of hits me personally, because one of the reasons I became a developer evangelist was because Salesforce wanted somebody stationed in the Midwest, and it was the first time anybody had had a conversation with me about working at Salesforce that did not include moving to the Bay Area, which was not high on my list of things to do. And I have to say, I'm very jealous and now considering moving to the Bay Area, because here in Chicago, you do still have to go to the DMV, and people are reporting that it's just a nightmare. It's just a nightmare. It's like, bring a chair and a book, because it's if you thought it was bad before, it's bad now. So because my wife and I are in the same situation. Our driver's license actually expired a couple months ago. So let's talk a little bit about tech, and starting with implementation. So Work.com is a managed package, and what should I think about when I'm moving it? Like, should I be moving into my org? Should I be moving into a separate org? Like, what are some best practices there?
Yeah, so a big one, probably a new one for old school Salesforce people, is we're actually requiring a net new org that we're calling, your Work.com org or HR org, or however you want to think about it. But we're actually requiring that the managed package that is Work.com be installed in an org separate from your CRM and business data. And the reason for that is to continue to promote that employees having agency over their data. You have to separate it from business functions, right? You don't even want to take the chance of like mingling that data, right? And that's for ethical reasons, compliance reasons. We don't want to introduce software that harms, whether that's harming the end employee or opens up the company to liabilities, right? We don't want to do that. And so that's the hugest thing. And then within that, the other thing to understand is, because it is a platform play, right? If you do want to grab things at AppExchange, one of the things I worked on personally was getting a host of partners ready with Work.com ready solutions the day we went GA. And so if you want to get those are also represented as a mix of extension, managed and unmanaged packages, depending on what you want to add in.
Got it. So that's interesting, because like from an architectural point of view, you're closing the door from me, even if I was doing it for rational reasons, like adding a wellness status to my contact field or anything like that. Like from my CRM data.
Yeah, from your CRM data.
Right, not within the work.org.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep. So we're separating those things out. I think the other thing that's really cool is we introduced the employee data model, and Work.com sits on the employee data model. And the employee data model was actually supposed to go beta this summer. It's just supposed to be something that people could see and test out, and it is already GA, and it's been GA for months now. And it's what Work.com sits on. And so it has connections, because it was a full platform play. It's got connections to everything from Trailhead to the survey and consent framework. It has things. It's linked also to user and individual. And I think we're also doing some work to even link it even more, right? Because as we put this thing out, it's just grown tremendously, right? And the asks and needs of what the employee data model can do have just grown out of this world. And so some cool technology we released in that.
Okay, so let's talk about that in more detail. And I know this is a podcast. We're doing an audio. I would love to be able to see an entity relationship diagram, but kind of walk me through that data model, maybe some of the design decisions around it, and what does it do for Work.com?
Yeah, let's start. So if you're looking at the data model, the first thing you're going to see is employee at the center, the employee object, and all the attributes that hang off of that. The next thing you're going to see is a direct relationship to the individual object. And the reason we did that is because the individual object gives you, with that, came for free from a development standpoint, the option to have both the consent framework and the survey framework in there. And the consent framework was really important because, I mean, that's the thing I've been sharing.
Right.
we got to have consent. We have to have employees bought into this, right?
Right.
The other thing that you're going to have connected to that is what we're calling the crisis management object that allows you to look at any crisis that happens, right? And so you don't have to just use like your command center and things like that for pandemic. You know, you can also use it for, you know, the hurricanes that happened or tornadoes or whatever thing that you consider a crisis, right? A crisis could be as simple as burnout, and I have a burnout problem and I want to manage that. And so you can put your crisis in there. And the nice thing about the crisis piece is it segments out that data, right? And so if you're looking at this data and you're trying to look, depending on, you know, how you've set up your permissions and all that, basically you can see data related to your pandemic. But if you were to switch crises, you would only see data related to that specific crisis. The other thing that we have within that framework as well is we have the ability to look at things by location. And we have all the location pieces in there, and we have the manager pieces in there. And those objects allow us both not only to see who works for who, but it also lets us see where people are. And that's how we're using it in the command center. Because what we realize is, and I'm sure everyone is aware of this, right? Every state, every country is in different stages of reopening. And one of the things you want to be aware of is how are employees in space A affected, because that may be different from how they're affected in some other place. And so those are some of the other objects that are there in the core employee data model.
Nice.
And then within that, it's connected then to all of the other apps and widgets. So Trailhead, contact tracing, shift management are also broken off as their own data models that are attached to the employee object in the employee data model.
Interesting. So what is the role in I mean, I know the role of Trailhead, but like specifically for this, how are those objects playing into work.com?
Yeah. So Trailhead, that's a great use case to talk through. Reskilling. Going back into the workplace now, post-COVID, is a completely different experience. And you're going to have to train your employees. You're going to have to let them know what the new procedures and processes are. And the best way to do that is to use Trailhead. And so Trailhead came out with some pre-built content kits that make it easy for employers to come up with that training and then to share it out to their employees as they return back to work.
Got it. Very neat. And I kind of want to close the loop a little bit on the consent and privacy aspect of it. If I'm a developer and I'm touching this data model, are there specific things that are like, you know, do or do nots when it comes to like working with the consent model?
I would say no. I would say you're pretty safe there. Do play with it. Do create something.
Got it.
It's extensible, right? The most amazing part of all this is it was built on Salesforce platform, right? It is meant to be extended. It's meant to be played with. And so go out there, try it, try to extend it, create different apps, do things, and push it to its max. I love to see the creative things that have come out just in these last few minutes and how people are using this new employee data model.
So yeah, let's go into more detail on that. And I think some of it you were saying is actually already on the App Exchange, but what are some interesting examples of ways that developers have embraced and extended this?
Yeah, I think one of the things, I've seen a lot of extensions of the contact tracing app. Or how people are wanting to do that within individual implementations. Like one of the things people probably have heard about is like, there's so many different ways to do contact tracing. You can use Bluetooth signals. You can use badge data and pull those things together to get even more accurate view of who was in a place by knowing whose cell phone was there or knowing who scanned into his place. And so they can take that contact tracing piece and they can blow our contact tracing out way more and plug into a company's badging system or into their corporate device system. And now you have a very specific view of how people are moving into space, who's in that space, when they left that space. And so you don't have to rely on people remembering, oh, I think I was there from 2 to 3. You can actually look at badge data and see exactly where exactly where they were. And now it's actually uploaded into the contact tracing tool. And so there's not, it makes it so much easier for the contact tracer or person who's, managing encounters to know what happened because the data is being fed right into the system.
Nice. Is there a project in your head that if a developer's listening to this right now, you would love for them to try to tackle?
Ooh, that's a good question. Actually, yeah. So one of the things we announced is a partnership with Workday as a result of this.
Okay.
I'd love to see more people leveraging Salesforce and Workday together to create very unique things. You know, we go hand in hand for a lot of employees. HR is their system of record for HCM, and we are their CRM. But with our introduction of this, right, and with Mulesoft building a custom accelerator using Workday data, allowing you to port things over, you can actually build really cool custom dashboards and apps using some of that data from both Workday and Salesforce together. And I know tons of customers really do that.
Nice. How else does Mulesoft play into this?
Yeah, so Mulesoft is how data is getting into the system, right? Mm-hmm. Whether that is from the initial implementation or more specifically, it's that Workday piece. So one of the things they did was they used their Anypoint framework, and they came up with the Workday accelerator, which allows you to connect your Workday data directly into Salesforce for use in Work.com. And we've already mapped some of those fields together. And so it works very seamlessly, and it provides a bidirectional sync between your system of record, which is Workday, and your employee engagement system over in Work.com.
Nice. So do you think it's fair to kind of paraphrase about what we're talking about is that it doesn't really, there's not a specialized skill set for this, for trying to work with Work.com, because it's built on the platform. So if you're a platform developer, you have the skills, but it is at least a very unique opportunity.
It is a unique opportunity, but I would look at it as a call to action. If you're sitting at home and you're a developer and you know how to build things, like this is a great opportunity to get your hands dirty on software that's helping people. And that helps open opportunities up during the pandemic. Like, there's so much technology that's been needed. You have to remember, little kids have to go back to school. Students have to go back to college. You and I are having to go back to the office eventually. And so if you have an opportunity and you have creative ideas, the sky's the limit. And companies are looking for things to help. Like, everyone's in a pandemic right now. This is one thing that touches every citizen in the world.
Yeah.
And so if you want to build something on a global scale that's really going to help people, now's the best time.
And that's our show. Now, we will include in the show notes links to the documentation about how to get your hands on the managed package for Work.com and getting it into a Scratch org or your partner developer edition. Now, before we go, I did ask Martie after her favorite non-technical hobby.
Anything involving flowers. Like, if I was not a tech nerd, I'd be a florist.
Nice. That's awesome. And my wife is a florist, so it's a wonderful hobby to have in the middle of a pandemic, because at least you still get to play with some dirt.
It's so true.
I want to thank Martie for the great conversation and information. Of course, as always, my thanks to you for listening. Now, if you want to learn more about this podcast, head on over to developer.salesforce.com/podcast, where you can hear old episodes, see the show notes, and have links to your favorite podcast service. Thanks again, and I'll talk to you next week.